I'm Sharon Schaffner-Meyer, and I'm the Managing Director for Delegate here in the Americas. And welcome, very much appreciate your joining us for our session here on the shaping the patent department in a changing market. I'm joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Carrie Jordan. Carrie is a partner at the Voorhees Houston office and a member of the Technology and Intellectual Property Group. James Beebe. James is the Senior Counsel, Intellectual Property at Baker Hughes at GE Company. Mark Kroll. Mark Kroll is Counsel at Leidig, Voigt and Mayer, is a Senior Advisor to Delegate. And Joseph Anchieri. Joseph is the Director of Strategic Accounts and Operations at Cardinal IP. Thank you, panel, for sharing your experiences today. We're going to cover some of these areas as you're shaping that patent department. We put together a program based upon feedback from you folks, but also feedback from your peers. We conducted a market research study that we're going to share with you that really talks about the case for change within the department, understanding leverage and monetization, thinking about the IP department as a strategic business advisors, and then that readiness for change. So, of course, when you think about what's driving the change, we asked what are some of the top mentions for what's driving the change. The CFO pressures, so pressures from within the business unit and the organization. The patent valuations are down. That's really impacting how people think about the portfolios that they manage. Market pressures, experience drain, experience within the teams, also from retirement, but also from just turnover within the team. Legislative and judicial changes that are impacting the approach that everyone is as you're thinking about how your founding strategies and your portfolio management, and then that paradigm shift, that innovation increasingly the result of interorganizational collaboration, global economy, global filings are up, cost drivers, the need to develop effective strategies to manage and minimize the cost drivers, and then just data and tools, all of the data overload, all of the tools that are available, and all of the various systems where the data exists, trying to manage that and bring it together. And really what you have is this increased need to have a broad, expansive portfolio, and then all these pressures that are driving the pressure on how you would get that done with the same amount of budget. So from my perspective, what we see is a lot of corporations are going through some of these changes, but the low-hanging fruit is no longer there. They no longer have that sort of easy portfolio pruning and some of the other low-hanging fruit that they've been leaning on for the last few years. And really, these pressures are mounting, and they're trying to think about what they need to do. What are some of the key changes that they need to see within their organization in order to move forward? So, if you're interested in the panel, I'd be interested in your thoughts on what you think about these pressures and how you're feeling those. James?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these comments are spot on, especially for where I sit in the oil and gas business. We've been going through an extended market downturn. We're starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel now, and things are starting to turn around, but we're still have significant pressures from the market, and all the things that were identified there. The CFO pressures, trying to justify the portfolio. Now that we've gone through this, and we've done a lot of what you were talking about, the low-hanging fruit, the pruning, and things. The business is looking to us to how are we going to control that spend going forward, even as the market recovers. So all of these spot on.
And your comments, Mark, do you have any comments?
Yeah, Sharon, this is Mark Kroll, and I just had a couple comments through my experience in my 20 years as the head of the IP department at Illinois Toolworks. it was interesting to me that over the course of the 20 years, how much more data the CFO had concerning the specific assets of the corporation and how those assets were helping the corporation. And of course, the patents, the patent portfolio is one asset, and how it was imperative to me, for me to be aware of how those patents are helping the company, and they're not just considered sunk costs or cost centered, so that we could see that they are leverageable assets, and so they benefit the company.
And this is Carrie, and just if you'd like a more detailed treatment of any of these factors, we've published a white paper. It's on the Vorys website, and it can give you some more details on any and all of these factors. Next slide.
Great. So we asked our IP leaders across the U.S. and Canada. So we did a market research study. It was a blind study. We had about a little less than 100 respondents, both across corporations and law firms. And we asked them how do they plan to address those pressures in 2018. And some of the top mentions were filing and maintaining fewer jurisdictions, fixed fees, U.S. firms, outsourcing administrative functions, docketing and paralegal, headcount reduction, and fixed fees with foreign firms. Those and so we've kind of shaped up our presentation to kind of hit on these areas that they plan to address as they're thinking about shaping up their department in the future. And so I think we already mentioned that there's this low-hanging fruit, and what we hear from loud and clear from our clients and also from our market research is that low-hanging fruit is just not available, and they can't rely on that going forward. So they're going to have to think about different ways to manage.
Yeah, and Sharon, I think we're sort of assuming here that the listeners on the webinar have taken advantage of the two of those things where they're doing fixed fees for both their U.S. domestic and international foreign firms. Because when you think about most IP, especially patent prosecution, patent preparation, are projects, and they should be done sort of on a fixed fee because the person doing the project needs to have the incentive to have that done at a specific rate, and that's very then predictable for the corporate client.
Exactly, Mark. And I think moving on to, with this slide and understanding your entire budget, you really have to look at it post addressing the low-hanging fruit. And that low-hanging fruit is the easy solutions, the flat fees to at least get predictability, if not cost control, and some other kind of low-hanging fruit things that you can do. In order to get beyond that, and what we mean by beyond that is controlling costs, but also building a portfolio that has more value and isn't viewed as such a sunk cost, requires a more deep understanding of really the elements at play within your entire budget. And the four elements, as we've kind of set them out, are, starting from the top right, is patent application preparation costs. That's kind of a big piece, and unfortunately, many companies start to just laser focus on that one piece, when really it is a smaller piece, even though it's shown equal here, of the overall budget. Another piece is staffing, and looking at external versus internal staffing and what's more effective in terms of a cost. Many outdated kind of assumptions are used to continue modes of staffing that may not make sense in today's market. Counsel and vendors, what we mean by this is prosecution costs from outside counsel, foreign counsel, and translation costs. And then the last piece is patent office fees, which includes maintenance fees, which is oftentimes 50 to 60% of your overall budget spend, as you know, annuities, and filing fees when you're filing around the world. So in order to get real control, you have to implement solutions that address all of these, and they have to address what the sources of waste are. And the sources of waste really are that the filing strategies and the patent management decisions in the portfolio don't align with what the business is doing and what the business's strategic goals are. That's the number one source of waste. The second most important source of waste is product and market evolution, where the patents don't reflect how products and markets have evolved over time, or if there's been a merger and acquisition and those patents are no longer relevant to the products that continue on. That's an example of how that can happen. Another factor that contributes to waste is risk aversion, because many managers don't necessarily want to be the guy that, or woman who killed the patent or killed a portfolio. And avoiding those decisions is easier in many cases. Another source of waste is unnecessary prosecution churn, where you're seeking broad claims and having multiple office actions in jurisdictions where claim scope is really not relevant because enforcement is unlikely. Another cost of waste is uninformed prosecution, which means, in my terms, you don't use early indicators to make educated decisions along the way. So you spend the money in the filing fee because you're risk averse, as opposed to taking a strategic approach that really gets you educated before you make the big investment on the next decision. The last source of waste is inefficient staffing, and that can be from an in-house point of view and an outside point of view. And these are the combined sources of waste that affect your overall budget picture. Mark and James, do you have any points of view to add on this from an in-house perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I really echo a lot of the things that Carrie's saying there, especially, there's a lot of focus at times at looking at the number of applications that are being filed, and a lot of focus beating up and driving down the drafting cost at that early stage. But if you don't do a good job of making wise decisions there, and you skimp on the drafting, you're going to pay for it down the road, especially when you're getting to these points of the early indicators and churn downstream after you get that application drafted and filed. So the more you have in-house counsel that's embedded in the business and understands the goals and objectives of the business and are taking that into account when they're making those decisions, the better control of your budget you're going to have.
I agree completely, James. And if you just go after that cost of applications and the cost per preparation of applications, what happens is you really undermine the quality of the assets. And you can actually control costs by looking at the filing fees, the maintenance fees, counsel fees, vendor fees, all of these other factors in a much more significant way to control your budget, and not just laser focus on this one that really is ineffectual. You want to optimize it, but that being your sole source of focus is missing an opportunity. Mark?
Yeah, Carrie and James, I couldn't agree more. And I think one easy way to look at this is to segregate those costs that go towards substantive legal work and those costs that go toward administrative or ministerial work, and then be prepared to pay good money for good substantive legal work, but be laser focused on making sure that you're getting a fixed cost and good fees and all the administrative fees, so that you can take advantage of volume in those areas.
Great. So one of the things that you all mentioned was really about that the staffing and what are you ready for the changes that are going to be happening within your department? And we asked that question in our market research, and the question was, is your team equipped to handle the changes? So we asked, what are all the changes that are happening, and what are the pressures you're feeling? And then we asked if your team was equipped, and it was a pretty high instance. So 73% of the team, of the respondents, said their team is not equipped to handle. Of those, 67% they're looking externally for the skills that they're needed. And the skills that they need are, we asked what skills were needed: IP valuations and mapping, programming, because a lot of the new software has a lot of bells and whistles, and you need a little bit of an understanding of programming, understanding risk management, data reporting and analytics, presentation skills as you're going back out to the business, to your business units, being able to present that. Having a bit of business development, so making sure you can talk about the IP department, and then organizational design. There's definitely a lot of changes that are happening, and the skills that are receding in need, I think the administrative, the docketing, and then managers. So trying to create a little bit more of a flatter organization. So that's the feedback from the respondents. But I'd be curious whether or not you guys are facing that within Baker Hughes, James.
No, absolutely. I mentioned earlier that we're going through an integration right now where we're trying to combine these two IP departments together, and we're also part of a larger GE organization. One of the things that jumps out at me on this list is all the things that deal with data. The IP mapping is really a labor-intensive work and can't be handled alone by the IP department. You really got to pull in the other parts of the business to help with that mapping exercise. We talk about data reporting and analytics. We talk about the new software tools and things that are out there. You've got attorneys, paralegals, docketing folks, external counsel are all generating just tons and tons, terabytes of data, and oftentimes they're in a lot of different systems. So a lot of focus on trying to reduce the number of those systems, to automate the tasks as much as possible, to simplify the steps, so that we've got all our data in one spot, and we can run the analytics on it and figure out where our core assets are. What are the assets we should be looking at to consider abandoning or dropping or monetizing and the like? And so it's really this focus on the simplification and the data analytics pieces that have been really driving a lot of our decisions.
And to that point, understanding data is another area of need. So this was the question was, the statement was, I have a good grasp of data available to make informed decisions on my patent portfolio. And a significant portion of the respondents said that's not the case. They don't have a good handle or a good grasp on that data. And then why? Information overload. What data is trustworthy or just worthy? There's a lot of data out there that's just data. Doesn't really help make decisions or inform decisions. So that's definitely an area that's definitely on the tops of minds of the IT leaders. So Mark or James, or even Carrie, if you've got some experience, that would be of data and how you want to manage data. What are your thoughts there?
Hey, Trent, it's James. Like I was commenting earlier, right? I mean, there's just so much data that's out there. I think that the things that really are critical are identifying those key indicators, the key pieces of data that you're going to use to help drive your processes. The comment about whether or not you can trust the data. On all of these things, I look at the data as a tool to help me make a decision, but it's not going to be the sole thing that makes the decision. You're still going to have to lay eyes on a patent, read the claims, figure out if the claims cover the product that you're worried about. So there's still some heavy lifting that has to happen, but a lot of these data analytics and tools that are coming along today can help narrow it down to where it's more manageable. You have to figure out the right tool for your data to help you make the decision-making process a little bit more streamlined.
Yeah, Sharon, this is Mark, and one example one simple, what was apparently a simple piece of data that really helped us was just in a patent family, in a worldwide patent family, which countries had we abandoned the patent and which were we still paying annuities on? And having that data available to the people in the countries where we're still paying annuities on to see if they were really, if it was still important in that country. So there's simple things within the corporation that the data that need to be brought out, fleshed out so that they're available, so that you can communicate effectively with the business people in making decisions on a real-time basis.
And I think that one of the most important pieces is communication, right? So communication of and using this information to communicate broadly within both within the department, but also with your business partners, and using this to help them understand, but also make decisions. So we talked a little bit about the need for change, the idea that we don't have the team and the skills that are needed, and so there's this idea around how would you manage and hire for this, build or hire for this talent. And what about retention? We didn't talk about sort of the average length of time of an employee might be 3 to 4 years, and if it takes 3 to 4 years to get somebody up to speed, you're constantly in the training mode. And then what work should I shift to a third party? What expertise should I outsource versus insource? There's also headcount versus budget. Sometimes it's easier to get budget versus headcount. Sometimes you want to have a spigot you can turn off more easily than you can with a headcount. And how do you build those business cases? So when you think about your talent management, so I'm going to ask the panelists this question. When you think about your talent management within your organization, how are you looking at the future, and what are you thinking about from training and building these skills within your team?
This is Carrie. Even from a law firm perspective, we're looking at what makes sense to outsource on our administrative back end, and we look at it in terms of profitability. How much will it take me to hire, train, retain, versus doing it with a third party. And, we've made some changes, and I think that's to the benefit of our clients. But even from a law firm perspective, I found this analysis to be very, very helpful.
Yeah, and Sharon, I think the analysis here has to start with a real understanding of the mission and the core competency of the IP department, especially the corporate IP department. And in my opinion, that core competency has to be how do the patents affect the margins of the products of the company, and how do the assets really work for the company? And the only way to really do that is to be able to communicate within the company, and that requires different set of skills sometimes than attorneys in private practice. And one example for me was the evolution of the need for having Excel skills. Coming in, I was needed skills in Microsoft Word so that I could communicate effectively, in Word. After a while, as it became more important to talk and communicate within the corporation in Excel and being able to use those skills, and I think it was incumbent not only on me but the attorneys and even the administrators in our department.
Yeah, this is James. I agree with Mark's comments. It really is all about what the goal of the in-house IP team is. I think that for us, that goal is good stewardship, right? Making sure that you're maintaining that IP portfolios so that you can maximize revenue, minimize risk for them. And you're going to have to look at all these different things kind of on a make versus buy decision process. Is this something that I can afford to staff up in-house to cover all of these issues? Or is it going to be something where I've got so many different jurisdictions that I'm going to be try to be a jack of all trades but master of none, right? So I need to look outside for expertise in these different areas to help supplement so that the in-house team can focus on their core mission of good stewardship.
Great. So Joe, I'd like to ask you a question specifically about pulling together and thinking about third-party expertise and what to outsource.
Sure. There was a case study Cardinal performed a few years back for a Fortune 500 company. Cardinal was providing some consulting work on their managed docketing efficiency and workflows. And what we did is we actually compared how their internal staff would docket a particular set of matters versus our external staff. And what we found is that there are a number of ways they could be much more efficient. One of the best ways was simply by reducing the number of clicks necessary to docket a particular matter. We actually reduced the number of times they click a mouse by 22%. Another way we found efficiencies is by revamping their workflow and dictating to outside counsel and foreign associates how matters should be coming into in-house counsel. And overall, with a number of these changes, we actually became, the client actually became much more efficient, cutting down the amount of time docketing by 40%. So that's a significant savings in terms of time, and that allows you to free up your people to focus on higher level, higher valuable work.
Great. And then I'm not going to go through this. I'm going to share it within our white paper, but there are considerations for using a third-party provider. Whether or not they are a good fit for you, how they're managing their data and security, what the tools are that are supporting their service, that quality assurance, and fees and effective costs. And so we've put together a very robust set of questions for each of these areas that you're considering using an outsourced provider, and we'll add that to the white paper. But given the time, I want to move forward and get to the next areas. So at this point, we're going to turn it over to Carrie to talk about understanding leverage versus monetization.
Thanks. And one of the considerations that you need to take into account as you're considering staffing and you're looking at make or build or, do you outsource, those kinds of things. One of the big things I feel like companies need to understand is the difference between having a patent portfolio that you can leverage versus one that you can monetize. A valuable patent portfolio that you can leverage can be used for corporate benefits. So, for example, it can be used to gain opportunities in jurisdictions where those opportunities would be valuable. It can be used to acquire talent or resources that the company doesn't otherwise have. It can also attract collaborators, as mentioned earlier by James and Sharon in one of the first slides. Collaboration is one of the main drivers of innovation in our present day. You can also enjoy tax benefits vis-a-vis a patent portfolio, as well as receive preferential treatment in certain jurisdictions such as Mexico, South Korea, Brazil, etc., just because you're patenting there. All of those are examples of leveraging a patent portfolio. And so your goal when you're making all of these changes is to really focus on, can you build this leverageable portfolio? And that is much broader, in my mind, than monetization. Monetization really is what I think of as licensing revenues or revenues that you get as a result of infringement allegations. Leverage really is much broader. And if you can move the internal understanding to leverage it can help you make some of these decisions as to how you address each of these factors of your budget in a much better way, and you can get internal buy-in on what you're doing. And we'll show you some tools as we move forward in this presentation to help you do it strategically. Mark? Mark, are you on mute?
Sorry, I was on mute, but
so.
Carrie, I couldn't agree more with your analysis. And maybe it was just our corporation, did not do a lot of basic research, but did a lot of innovation for their customers, and so the leverage. And I like this slide because as the leverage is seen as much bigger than the monetization, because that was definitely our focus, but. We did have a few patents that we tried to monetize, and it was interesting to me, at least a few occasions, when we do that, the most attractive customers, or the customers that were attracted to our patents, were competitors, and the business unit people in those business units would definitely say, over my dead body, are we going to license the competitor? So we'd figure out something different to do. And so then, and it showed then to me that these were really leverageable within the corporation also, even though they weren't monetized.
But I think it gives you a good vocabulary as you're looking at this critical analysis and how to structure your department. Want to move to the next slide, Sharon? And so one of the questions when you're thinking about downsizing that we discussed as a panel was, what does your IP department look like in this new world? And really, your IP department must now support your company's business strategy. It has to have proper management, must start at the senior levels of executive leadership and filter down into the activities of all of the various business units and functional groups within the company. In effect, I think the IP organization serves as a kind of transmission belt for strategic and tactical dialogue about IP and opportunities between the executive suite and the business units that deals with various R&D, marketing, business development, and communication challenges for the company. And if the IP groups to be effective in this role, it should really not only be attorneys and administrative professionals, but business development, finance, M&A, marketing, licensing, and communication experts as well, so that it can become this driving transmission belt for opportunity and business growth. James and Mark?
No, Carrie, I absolutely agree. You've got to engage all of those different parts of the business in order to make those wise filing decisions. It's one that you should be having constant communications with them to make sure you know where they are, where they're going, and you're going to have to revisit it through the life cycle of the portfolio.
Exactly. And another thing that the critical analysis of what that team can do is start to look at filing and maintenance decisions within the patent portfolios in a much more strategic way. And the best way to really control all aspects of that budget picture that we put up before is really to align what the business goals and objectives are with these patenting decisions. And you have to do that in view of what I'm calling the jurisdictional realities. The jurisdictional realities are how stable is a particular political system within that jurisdiction? How corrupt is it? How can a non-resident company really enforce something there? How long does it take to get a patent? What does patenting in that country get you? Those are the jurisdictional realities that you always have to keep in mind. But then you also have to look at what's your market potential? What are the growth in the technology, including current and future R&D, and what your product pipelines and what your commercial efforts to understand what your business activities are and the justifications for that moving forward as to where you're filing. And you have to take into account what your competitors are doing. You want to create blocks that can either create leverage or monetization opportunities where competitors have or will likely have a footprint. And so if you approach your patenting decisions with this background, you can make better choices. Any comments on that?
Yeah, my comment is this definitely has to have communication with or be driven by the business unit leaders within the countries in which you're patenting or maintaining your patents, so that they understand which assets have patent protection. They can use that in their pricing decisions, but then they also understand where if they're not using that asset, that you're not spending time and money renewing it or paying annuities.
Exactly. And recognizing our clients were struggling to take all of that data and make it meaningful so that they could make decisions given the limited time they have when they're juggling all these other factors, we developed a proprietary tool that we're calling Patently Integrated Strategic Filing Advisor and Management Advisor. So what this does is it looks at all of the jurisdictions of particular interest, either by the client in that business or that product line, or whatever granularity they're looking at it, and what competitors, jurisdictions the competitors are finding important. And then it looks at what the actual business activities are within those jurisdictions and what they're likely to be by that client, what the strategic reasons for being in that jurisdiction are, and then what the competitive intelligence is. And then with an algorithm we've developed, it comes in and puts a single number on that degree of alignment with your business strategy. And that's the final column on the right. One of my partners likes to liken this to a FICO score. It gives you an instantaneous number by which you can kind of see where you fall in the relative degree of alignment within your business. And then you can use this to help you drive decisions for filing as well as maintenance and prosecution. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, Carrie, to me, this tool is really cool for a number of different reasons. But the biggest thing that it does is it gives you, as IP counsel, a tool to sit down with your business leaders and have an informed discussion about where you should be seeking patent protection for the innovation. That score, that the PI Strategic Index score, it's not the end all be all. It doesn't mean that just because those 4 in the green are in green that you've got to file there, and that the ones that are in yellow are ones that you should consider avoiding. But it helps drive that conversation. And it really helps that decision-making process get a lot more streamlined. And I can tell you by using something like this, the outcome is usually going to be a better thought out reasoning, and informed decision on your filing plan. And you're probably going to end up saving a lot of money because you're going to end up making some hard decisions that you probably would have just said, well, let's go ahead and file anyway. And I think the other big thing about this is that you couple this with a forecast on how much you're going to spend to hit all those countries. It makes it a lot easier to make that decision.
Exactly, James. And just to give everyone a sense, this table is an example that is extrapolated from an actual client report that we did, and they had been filing in 34 countries regularly, and we came in and said, no, 4 are really strategic. 8 might be aligned. The yellow indicates a lesser degree of alignment, the orange even less. Red means, hey, this isn't aligned, this is an opportunity for cost savings. And we were able to say, okay, 8 of your 34 may make a lot of sense. 4 really make a lot of sense. And so 8, 34 minus 8 gets you to 26, and 26 times 3 to 5,000 per case in each of those countries amounts to a lot of savings. So to James's point, it can make a very big difference. And this isn't the only way to do it. It's just a way we've developed. Moving on, additionally, people, I think, want to always have a one-size-fits-all in terms of, do you file PCT first, or do you file Paris Convention, or do you start in the U.S., do you start with a provisional? There's always somebody that wants to find the one way to do it all the time. And one thing I want everyone to walk away from this teleconference with is there isn't a one-size-fits-all rule. It all is going to depend on what your overall goal is. Is it lowest total cost? Is it that the technology needs more time to develop, so you're always going to want to delay? Or is it some hybrid between the two? And that has to be taken into account, that goal, in conjunction with the jurisdictions that are most strategic. Then you have to look at which filing route gets you there the best. And it isn't always going to be the same one. It just really isn't. And I would encourage everyone to do that analysis, because you can come up with anywhere from 10 to 40% in savings on each file if you really do that critical analysis. We have an algorithm that does this, but you can do this analysis just by thinking about what the countries are and the best way to get there, given your overall corporate goal. James, any questions on that? Or any other comments, I mean?
No, I mean, look, I mean, when you're developing a portfolio, and especially if you're a company with inventors that are across the globe, and as we've commented before, a lot of the times you're doing a lot of collaboration. So you've got folks that might be contributing to an invention in multiple countries. The filing path forward, not setting aside some of these things in terms of, am I trying to get the cheapest, the delay or what have you, just the fact that you've got inventors in 5 different countries trying to figure out the most effective way to get to your end game isn't always the easiest thing. And so sitting down and thinking through that, tools like this patently integrated product really help streamline that decision-making process to try and figure out what's the best way to get to my end game.
Yeah, and my only comment on this is that it's important that you understand who you're talking to or who you're communicating with within the corporation, not just the inventors, not just the technical department, but also the people with bottom line responsibility and product responsibility, so that you can understand that the new invention is really making a difference. And this is where, to me, often delay does help, because initially after a new invention, there's going to be oftentimes the inventor and other people will kind of fall in love with the invention, and the longer you can go, you can see if the bloom comes off the rose, and that the product is making a difference in the marketplace, and thus warrants the continued spending on the prosecution and annuities for the patents that protect that.
I agree, Mark. The problem is sometimes that people, I think, forget that their budget's going to be hit 3 years down the road by the PCT fees, and when you go national stage. And so when you're thinking about that plus your maintenance fees that you are already going to be paying that year, 3 years down the road, how much of your budget have you already eaten up before you've ever gotten to filing new files, new applications on new technology? So I think you have to consider every time you delay, is it justified in view of the fact that you're eating dollars from future innovation protection? But that's my caveat there. On the next slide, I think the point here is that the typical approach when you're prosecuting is always to start with broad claims and then try to get those broad claims in all of the jurisdictions. And so they spin, as I call it, in every office with foreign counsel touching it, the foreign fees accumulating, annuities accumulating, trying to get these broad claims. And what I want to challenge everyone to think about is reversing the idea and using it or looking at it in a prism of what do I need where. So you can use the jurisdictional analysis that I've color-coded in the same way from the patently integrated slide to say, okay, in the orange jurisdictions, which are less aligned with my business strategy, it may be fine that I go and get my picture claim, and I don't need to let it spin in prosecution in order to get a broader claim, because it's not going to matter. That jurisdiction isn't aligned for whatever reason. Yellow, I may have to do a combination approach. Maybe it does make sense to try, but as long as I can get my picture claim in most instances, that may be enough. And I need to look at what my competitor's doing in that jurisdiction, as well as what I'm doing to decide. In the green, those are jurisdictions that are critical to my business, and therefore I want to get broad claims if I can get it. So there, I would want to allow the spin to occur so that I get broader claims. So you can use that jurisdictional ranking as a way to also control prosecution costs. And then doing it that way, you can have educated decision making along the way. Mark, you want to add a comment on that?
Well, just one comment. One way to look at this is how do you set up your worldwide prosecution, and do you do it through a hub and spoke where there's one individual that then dictates or determines what the claims are in each country, or do you allow each agent in each country to try to get the broadest protection in each country? And as Carrie said there, that latter, if you do the latter, you can sometimes have inefficiencies because not every country is as important to have the broadest scope as other countries.
Exactly. So your green can be your hub.
So one of the things that comes to mind, we spent a lot of time here just now talking about the preparation and prosecution side of it, controlling those costs, is now you've got an asset. It's either one that is still in prosecution or one that's issued, and you've got maintenance and annuity fees. They're going to continue to accrue over the life of the patent. If you look at some of this data that we've got here, for an annual expense for carrying patents around 7.5 million for a 100 patent family size portfolio. These costs over the life of a patent can get large really fast. And so, this is definitely something where you can use these same kinds of tools like the patent asset index or the patently integrated tool to try and make those decisions, because as Mark was saying, over time the bloom comes off the rose, and so that patent that you got 5 years ago may not be a core patent anymore. The product line leader may have taken the product in a different direction, and it's not core, and you don't need to maintain it. And so you've got to have processes that you put together in order to figure out how you're going to make those decisions going forward. And some of these tools are ones that might be able to be used in that. Carrie, any comments on that?
Carrie, you might be on mute.
I am. Thank you very much. I was talking to myself. In the next slide, Sharon, it really gives you an idea of how you might be able to use this jurisdictional alignment idea to do a pruning. So, for example, for jurisdictions that are what I call red jurisdictions that aren't aligning with your business, those are things that are going to be your low-hanging fruit within your portfolios. So you can use this as a triage to get to those first. The orange are probably even more are more likely to not match your business goals, and so those are the next step. Yellow and then green are ones you might not have to touch. And if you're dealing with portfolios that are the size of GE's, for instance, this gives you a way to triage what you're going to look at in a business-focused way. And so this is an analysis that can help you do that. There's also other analytical tools that are helpful. I know, James, you've had some in the patent scores.
Yeah, and exact same concept there, right? You're looking at those patent index scores or the patent asset index score, or the patent strength score to help identify potentially low-performing assets, and those would be the ones that you would look to prune first. You can also use different aspects of those scores where you might be looking to see if that patent is still internally relevant, meaning that you're still citing, you're filing new applications and you're citing to those, so you're still building in those technology areas, or is this one that's declining, and that may give you more reason to look to prune going forward.
I agree. The patent citation analysis is interesting for sure as a piece of this.
And and after you've gone through the pruning process and you've identified assets that aren't core to your portfolio, you're going to have to make a decision on what you're going to do with those. And for the vast majority of those patent assets, the likely outcome probably is abandoning those assets so that you no longer incur those expenses. But that's not the only route that you might be able to go. There could be a lot of different paths There is still some potential for some tax benefits by donating those assets if you can find the right partner to make that donation to, usually a nonprofit like a university or a hospital or something along those lines. There may be some tax benefits that you can look to. There are other avenues such as patent pools, patent sales, and then of course patent licensing opportunities where you might need to work with a broker. And then one of the new ones that came about a couple of years ago was this concept of a patent bank, to where you could donate your patents into a patent bank, and then they could be used as a license to a startup, and you would get an equity stake in the startup. So a lot of different other avenues to look for places to where these assets that may not be valuable to you anymore, but you may be able to find a way to drive some value from moving them on to a different home.
Point. So we've talked about the drivers for change and the need for change. We've talked about some of the when you get beyond the low-hanging fruit. We've talked about some of the ideas around how to think about managing your resources internally, both talent and skills needed, as well as thinking about outsourcing and some really great tools that you can think about aligning your business goals, aligning your strategy to your business goals. And now the last thing we wanted to cover before we get to questions, I want to let everyone know that we will stay a little bit late to answer some of the questions, but making the case for change, the readiness for change. I'm not going to go through this whole process. We really don't have the time to do it. It will be part of the information that you receive after the webinar. But I'll say that don't underestimate how important it is when you think about the right-hand side, that's sort of evaluating, so what's the end goal and how to evaluate current state, create a gap analysis, get the alignment you need within the organization, both within the team and across the business, and then managing that implementation. And don't underestimate the importance of the communication and analysis, in developing your plan, and also then planning for the appropriate amount of time to transition. So before we move on, I'd ask James, where, I know your organization is going through this, and sort of where are you in the process, and what tips would you leave for the folks attending? We're
kind of in the middle of the implement side. We've done a lot of evaluating, a lot of trying to get alignment between the two different groups, and we're in the process of trying to implement a lot of solutions. And a lot of the things that we're implementing are things to simplify and automate and streamline our processes. And I think the big thing there is to make sure that you involve all of the different stakeholders that may be out there, all the way down to your administrative folks, your attorneys, your engineers. Everybody really has a comment or influence on that process, and without some of that feedback, you're not going to have a successful project at the end of the day. And so, really communicate to them all, get engagement from as broad a community as you can, and then you're going to have to start the process all over again, because some of this stuff we started a year and a half to 2 years ago, and there's been a lot of changes on the fly, but I'm sure once we get done, we're going to have to make some more changes.
Great. So, Mark, I know that you were at Illinois Tollworks. You went through this process in the past. What were some of your tips?
Just the only thing I would say is that stay in communication with your accounting department and your and the manufacturing or sales departments, because the accounting department has great numbers on overall profitability and margins and things like that, but don't really think about products. And the manufacturing and engineering departments think about products, but don't have the fix on numbers and which ones are profitable. And you're in a unique position to be able to act as the bridge between those two departments, and then identify the ones then that have the high margins and the products, and you know, a lot of it is because they are the innovative products, and they are the ones then that command the strong patents, and you can connect all those together, and you can be the hero in your corporation.
Great, and thanks to the panel. That was really helpful. I know we had to go through some of the material pretty quickly, but we will make it available after the webinar. We have just enough time. We have a number of questions which we will answer, but I do have a couple of questions, and this one is directed to James. James, what are your thoughts on outsourcing outside of the U.S. with IP that should not be leaving the country?
Yeah, this is a problem. At least for us, it's a problem that's not just the U.S. problem. This can be a problem if you've got inventors and innovation going on in any country that has export control laws that are similar to the U.S. You know, we've got this come up in multiple other countries. You know, and it's something that you've got to start addressing at the invention disclosure stage. So, you know, if you've got an online system where you're collecting information, you've got to make sure that export controlled information is not going into a system that's outside of the country that information was generated in. So if you're in the U.S. and it's a U.S. system, obviously you wouldn't want folks from outside of the U.S. submitting into it export controlled information from another country, say France, and you wouldn't want folks from outside of the U.S. to be able to access that information if it's U.S. export controlled information. So you've got to be able to flag it so that you know how to deal with it, and when it is that kind of information, you know, at least you have to manage it in country. So that may mean that you've got to have you know, attorney and business leaders in the country of origin to make those decisions to file. And once they make those decisions to file, then it should be drafted and filed in that country. And then you know, after it's been filed and the patent office gives you the filing license, then you would be allowed to take the application, none of the rest of the material, obviously, but the application into the foreign jurisdictions, assuming that you got the license and it wasn't, you know, a secrecy order. It would be kind of a general way of handling it.
And to add to that, James, if the question was really kind of asking, you know, can I outsource my application prep to India, for instance? You know, there's a number of issues that come into play. One of which that people don't often think about is the ethical duties you have with respect to supervising when you're outsourcing. And if you're outsourcing offshore, you have potential ethical implications that may be able to be used to invalidate the patent, for instance. That hasn't happened yet, but you could definitely see how that could happen. As James says, export control is an entirely different issue, and it isn't satisfied by a foreign filing license. So if you're going to export the data, you need to work with the Bureau of Industry and Security Administration at the Department of Commerce in order to get the appropriate clearances, so you're not also violating export control laws. So there is a lot of issues that are involved if you really want to outsource your patent drafting.
Great. We'll take one more question here. It's directed to Mark. What are examples of genuinely helpful metrics that can be used to demonstrate the IP department value in today's businesses?
Yeah, and I guess I can answer that from two different perspectives, two different sort of independent answers. One is from an internal perspective that I discussed just a few minutes ago, and this is where you can control what I call the Holy Trinity: the patent, product, margin. If you can connect those three and show that for some business unit or product line, certain of the products have patents and they enjoy high margins. Other products do not have patents, they do not have high margins, and then if And it doesn't have to be over the entire corporation, but if you can have a few anecdotal evidences of that, that can be very powerful in the corporation. From the other point of view, there is surprisingly a large amount of data in annual reports that you can compare your department with the competitors or other corporation departments. One interesting thing to me is there's the R&D spend that is listed in every annual report, and you can compare then your internal patent spend with your R&D spend, and then you can also know how many patents are issued by other corporations through public data, and know your patents that are issued, and you can start to run metrics and compare your spending, your number of patents, and your R&D spend, and obviously then there's your corporation's revenues and other public data, and start to do some spreadsheets and understand where you fit in the within your in your business sector.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the panel. Appreciate your perspective. Appreciate your sharing your time. Again, to those folks who sent in questions, we will answer those questions following the webinar through the email system. We do have some upcoming exchange sessions that are directed at some of the data that we talked about, best practices around specific countries for foreign filings, managing large portfolios, and looking at focused prosecution strategies for better asset development and management. So we look forward to seeing you or presenting to you again on a future webinar. And again, thank you to the panel.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.